Experiences of the use of the ObjectID standard in museum documentation, conducted through the free and open source Tainacan software, tests between Brazil and Mexico. This research considered the implementation process of the ObjectID standard on the free and open source software Tainacan in two museological institutions from different countries, Brazil and Mexico. Tainacan was developed in Brazil and adopted by Mexican institutions for the management and promotion of digital collections based on WordPress. The input of this research lies on the intertwinement of Tainacan and ObjectID and Dublin Core used as the basis for defining a metadata schema up to the needs of Brazilian and Mexican institutions. In January 2020, two teams from the Universidade da Brasília and the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México began a research project with two main objectives. First of all, to improve the documentation practices in the museums of their respective countries. Both teams shared the intuition that the museums of Brazil and Mexico presented similar conditions. For instance, a limited or very tight budget and few personnel dedicated to documentation or cataloging tasks, a limited experience and knowledge in the field of information technology, and finally, a growing interest in publishing catalogs online. One initiative for museums. In the following, I will describe the work carried out by the Mexican team during this research project. There were two Mexican museums who collaborated during this research. One of them was the Museo Postal Filatélico, which is located in the heart of Mexico City. By 1907, it became the headquarters of the postal services of the nation, one of the longest-standing establishments in the country. Given the continuously growing collection of post stamps, documents, and different objects related to the post service, the museum was founded finally in 1920 to preserve what nowadays is considered industrial postal heritage. To this day, it is a public organization under national administration. Its collection is formed of approximately 50,000 items, and it has a total of 14 staff members, among which a librarian oversees the register area. Centro Cultural Universitario Tlatelolco, CCUT for its acronym in Spanish, was founded in 2007 by the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. It was defined as a multidisciplinary complex dedicated to the research, study, and promotion of subjects related to art, history, and resistance processes. The museum displays a diverse collection of approximately 52,500 cultural items distributed in different internal collections. For instance, it safeguards the documentary heritage of the art critic Juan Hacha, as well as part of the Mexican movement of 1968. It also safeguards other works of artistic and archaeological nature. The initiative to promote documentation practices inside a CCUT came from an archaeologist in charge of the archaeological collection, because she is strongly engaged in learning the Tainacan software. We will only focus on her experience. In order to know more about the current state of documentation practices and IT infrastructure, a survey was carried on in these two museums. The structure of the survey was based on a previously existing document known as the Diagnostic Questionnaire to evaluate the level of technological maturity in the management of museum collections in Mexico. The survey is divided in 7 thematic axes: characterization of the institution, information management, human resources, IT infrastructure, media and communication, institutional management, and governance. The result of the survey indicated that the Museo Postal had a 20% in the progress of their objects inventory against 32% in the case of the AC. Moreover, the Museo Postal reported not having an established documentation system based on metadata standards, nor using any software to record their information. On the other hand, the AC has a FileMaker database. However, this application does not cover the specific needs for the desired collection management. Their electronic records are mainly done on Excel, where they organize the inventory, administrative information, and aspects related to collection management, such as loans in the case of the AC. Additionally, the Museo Postal has not carried out any digitization of their items. On the contrary, the AC affirms that 32% of their collection has been digitized. There is an average of 4.5 people enrolled in documentation practices in both institutions. Moreover, the qualification of the staff in this field is sporadic. Regarding the IT infrastructure, the Museo Postal reported a total of 9 computers, all of them in good condition and with a high-quality internet connection. Nevertheless, none of these devices are exclusively used for documentation tasks. Neither of the museums have their collections exhibited online. The work between the museum professionals and the specialists from UNAM aim to improve the documentation practices in the museums. The methodology established can be defined in 4 steps, which I will proceed to describe. First of all, the conduction of seminars regarding the need of documentation policies, use of metadata standards, and the importance of controlled vocabularies. Secondly, the installation of the Tainacan software and the use of the OpenRefine tool for reconciling the information of their databases. The step 3 consisted of the creation of a crosswalk schema. The staff of both museums mapped the information elements of their inventories into ObjectID and Dublin Core standards. Finally, they designed a digital repository in Tainacan, captured some items of their collections in the software, and visualized them as if they were published online. Here you may find an example of the Tainacan template created by the Museo Postal with an image and its metadata elements. Now I will continue to explore the Brazilian case. One of the Brazilian museums involved was the Victor Meirelles Museum. This is a museum linked to the Brazilian Museum Institute of the Ministry of Tourism. It was created in 1952 in the house where the artist was born, in the Florianópolis Center, capital of the state of Santa Catarina, Brazil. The museum's initial collection consisted of 27 works of art by the private painter, donated by the National Museum of Fine Arts. Currently, the collection has a total of 237 works, produced by more than 80 artists. All the works are digitized and published in the institution's digital repository. The second museum was the Itaipu Archaeology Museum, which was inaugurated in the 1970s. It has a collection of 1,040 objects, all of which are documented and available for public access in its digital repository. We want to point out that the 2 Brazilian museums chosen already have their digital repositories completed and online in the Tainacan software. In the same way that the survey was carried on in the Mexican museums, it was also applied to the Brazilian ones. The results reveal the technological situation of the institutions. For instance, the Itaipu Archaeology Museum had completely migrated its inventory to Tainacan. Despite that the museum doesn't use any international metadata standard, it follows the parameters established by the Brazilian Museum Institute for Inventory Rules. Therefore, the museological documentation of this museum only covers the basic aspects of description for identifying cultural objects. Its collection is almost completely digitized despite of its poor IT infrastructure. Finally, although all the employees have computers, the equipments are old and have several problems. As for the Victor Meireles Museum, its inventory is completed but doesn't use any metadata standard. Both museums have a very fragile documentation infrastructure where a metadata standard is not clear. The use of a controlled vocabulary was present only at the Itaipu Archaeology Museum, without any specific rules or manuals. The process of working with Brazilian museums followed a slightly different path from the way it was carried out in Mexico, as the Tainacan software was already being implemented in museums of Brazil since 2018. The methodology in Brazil consisted of 5 technical stages of treatment of the documentation. First, we have the database migration. The documentation from the Museum of Archaeology of Itaipu was found in individual files in Word format. As for the documentation of the Victor Meireles Museum, can be found in Excel spreadsheets. This information was migrated to an SQL database for further processing. Secondly, a crosswalk to the Brazilian Institute of Museums. In 2014, the Brazilian Institute of Museums developed a metadata model for the generation of inventories of museological objects for museums. To adapt to this new reality, all the existing documentation from the 2 museums was migrated to this new model. The third step was the standardization and data processing. With the use of tools such as OpenRefine software and Python scripts, the documentation was standardized and cleared of syntactic errors. This was followed by a publication in Tainacan. Once the data was organized and cleared, it was published in a digital repository using the Tainacan software. Finally, in addition to the 4 previous steps, we have the experiment crosswalk to ObjectID. The experiment consisted of mapping the current information from the documentation of the 2 museums to ObjectID. The mapping revealed that there is a common nucleus of data elements in the 2 museums. However, it seems that the Victor Meireles Museum adapts better to the ObjectID model than the Itaipu Archaeology Museum. In order to give a closure to this reflection, we can say that in Mexico, the use of Tainacan is recent, and for this reason, the work with the museums began by designing the characteristics that the repositories would have, including the modeling of the metadata. On the contrary, the Brazilian museums already had a couple of years working with the software. This is the reason why their approach was different, for they focused on converting the existing data model to one compatible with the ObjectID standard. As actions for the future, we consider the following. They need to demonstrate the importance of interoperability of digital repositories for museum institutions more widely. Secondly, the establishment of a documentation strategy based on ObjectID in order to fight back the illicit trafficking of the cultural heritage. And finally, to promote professionalization in museum documentation. Thank you very much for your attention.